Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome back to the Goldster Inside Story. I'm absolutely thrilled to also welcome back one of our favourite authors from last year. So I've got Sue Teddern with us again, and this is her new novel, The Pre-Loved Club. And you may remember, those of you who've been Goldster members for a while, that we talked last time about her first novel, Annie Stanley All at Sea, which I believe Sue has one there she prepared earlier. Excellent. Thank you. Sue, welcome. Thank you so much for coming back.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So tell us what it's been like. You've got a second novel out. Annie Stanley's still doing really well. I believe we're going to talk a bit later about you working on a third one. How does it feel to have made this change into being a novelist from having been a radio writer predominantly before?
It does feel strange because there was a few years before this avenue opened to me. Well, I opened the avenue. I went down the avenue myself. Before this happened, I just thought I was in my twilight years as a writer because it's just hard to maintain a script writing career for as long as I have because they're always newer, younger people. And novel writing wasn't something I'd actually ever thought was going to be how I continued my career. So it's just a bonus, really. And when I go into bookshops and I see Annie Stanley next to, who did I see her next to recently? One of my very favourite authors. So it'd be Elizabeth Taylor. I just think, wow, how cool is that? And it just was coincidence. She's TA and I'm TE. So yes, it continues to give me huge pleasure that these books are out there, because when you write them, you just don't believe anyone else is going to see them.
Well, I know everyone I know who's read your books, both of them, has absolutely loved them. In fact, my sister asked me specifically to say she can't wait to read this one. She loved Annie Stanley. She's having her COVID jab, so she couldn't come along today. But she said she was so frustrated to not be able to come because she's become such a big fan. So tell us about Annie Stanley. For those who weren't here before, tell us about Annie Stanley, the plot of it, obviously without any spoilers, and why that made you want to write the second one.
Well, it's complicated, and as much I don't know whether this is information that's actually relevant, but I wrote to 20,000 words of the second one first. And sent it to my agent. And when I got some interest from Pan Macmillan, they said, we really like this idea, but the other idea you sent in that was just one page, we'd like that one first. So that's how Annie Stanley came first. Pre-Love came second. So that was a bit of a shock to me because I thought, but I've written 20,000 words, can't I just carry on? And they said, no, start again. So I started Annie Stanley from scratch. That was an idea I'd had a long time ago. I have to confess, and don't make this public or tell anyone, but a lot of ideas I come up with are ideas that I thought of for radio a long, long time ago. And I had an idea for radio that never got anywhere, about a woman who, now Annie Stanley, who in a moment of sort of madness, steals her father's ashes from his girlfriend, and takes him on a tour of the sea areas of the shipping forecast because that's what he loved. And she's very nervous that his girlfriend, his lady friend, I mean, you know, she'd be in her 60s, his lady friend was going to scatter the ashes somewhere inappropriate. So she takes them, and in the end, accidentally takes them on a tour of, I always do this because it's the shape of the British Isles, takes them on a tour of the sea areas of the British Isles. And through her journey, she's not a very happy character at the beginning, although she does, the reader knows it, but she doesn't get it. And in the course of her journey, she meets people, she reignites relationships and catches up with old school friends and makes amends with people and just becomes a slightly nicer person. And there were no spoilers.
No, there were no spoilers there. And I want to talk to you a bit later about characterization, because you are wonderful at creating these characters. And the same with the Pre-Loved Club, who we know as a reader a bit more about them than they've realized about themselves. I think we can say very much with Gemma and Ned. So tell us about the Pre-Loved Club. So you started working on that beforehand. And what was that like to have to finish working on it and start working on something completely different? When you came back to it, was it hard to pick up on it, or did you get straight back into it?
It really was. And both books, I tended, for some reason, I started them in January, which is a really hard time to write. And to get back to Pre-Loved was nerve-wracking because there was something about Annie Stanley that, because of the chapters of the sea areas that she visits, I kind of had a spine for the book. I mean, obviously it was a lot more complicated than that, but because I knew she was going to go to she had to work her way around the coast. It gave the book a spine. So when I came back to the Pre-Love Club, I was like Annie Stanley all at sea, because I wasn't sure what I was doing. And there was a point, it had a previous title, which was The Year of Bad Choices, which never got stuck. And I first of all thought, I know, each chapter will be a month of their lives. Far too, you know, I was trying to do a David Nichols one day thing. Well, I really admire him, because that's such a difficult device to put into practice, because if people are becoming friends, you need to see the friendship develop over days and weeks. You can't wait a month. And so that held me up for the first few weeks. And then I think I just got on with it. I've got a whiteboard here that's generally blank, because I know I should map things out on it, but a lot of it's in my head. But once I'd worked out the plot and the relationships, it seemed to kick off. But having those 20,000 words at the beginning was a help and a hindrance. It was a relief that I knew I'd done some of the writing, but I just knew there was still a lot more to do.
And I put a link to Annie Stanley All at Sea in the chat. We've already had a comment. I loved Annie Stanley. Really looking forward to the next book. So thanks.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Do you remember, everybody, you can put your questions and comments in the chat and I will read them out to Sue. So with the Pre-Loved Club, tell everybody who hasn't read it a little bit about, obviously, again, without any spoilers, but who are the Pre-Loved Club and who are the main characters?
Well, we've got Ned and Gemma. I mean, there's a story I can come back to about how the life that this idea has had, because it's been with me for my whole writing career. But Ned and Gemma are both single parents. They were both dumped. They weren't the ones who instigated the breakup of their relationship, and they're both coming to terms with it. Ned's rather, I was writing something this morning about them, and Ned's cup half full and Gemma's cup half empty. So he's very optimistic, slightly gullible, very sweet man who doesn't understand why his wife left him, and through that he only sees his daughter at weekends. So he's very sweet but slightly dopey. Gemma is very hard-bitten and spiky and sparky and doesn't take prisoners. And they meet at this support group for single parents, and they don't hit it off straight away. In fact, they have a stand-up row. But through the course of the book, they become friends and a sort of support system, as each of them is trying out dating again and trying out just getting on with their lives and building up a relationship with their child and establishing or continuing some kind of relationship with their exes, in different ways, in very different ways. I won't spoil that. But there's a lot of contact with their exes, obviously, because Ned has his daughter at weekends and Gemma passes her son on to her ex at weekends. So she's kicking her heels at weekends and he's suddenly a parent at weekends.
I really like that concept, and you really showed both sides as well. You showed the mother's and father's side. I thought, did you speak to a lot of friends who were in that situation, or did you talk to kind of support groups, or was it just through things that you've gleaned over the years?
It's stuff I gleaned over the years. I've got a friend who was widowed and is now remarried, but I was sort of hearing a lot of the way he was trying to cope with two kids. So you pick up things from people and you just think of logically. I mean, a lot of the writing and a lot of the story, creating the story comes out of thinking, how would someone do this? How would someone cope with this? How would someone have a relationship if their child is staying but going back to their parents and might report on it or whatever? So I think a lot of it was just imagining scenarios. I mean, I'm not a parent, I'm not a single parent, but I think you just think about logically, how would that pan out with people who are trying to hold on to jobs and start again.
And you really get into the emotional life of your characters. Do you do a really kind of comprehensive background? Do you know the ins and outs of all of your characters? Do you know how they think in certain situations, and how do you get to that?
Well, this is where I'll come back to where the idea came from, because it goes back pretty much, I haven't worked out how many years, but it would be about 30 years ago, maybe. I did a writing class with a lovely playwright called Olwen Wymark, and it was a script writing class at the time. And she set an exercise where we all had to write a scene with the opening line, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" For some reason, I came up with an idea of a single parent needing to take his daughter to the toilet, a public toilet, and not knowing whether to go in with her or whether to wait outside, and being feeling very awkward. And then a woman comes and helps him, who's also a single parent. So the idea has been with me for a long time. And at one time, I think I wrote it as a sitcom, and then it got parked for a while, and then it became the radio series, because a radio producer said to me, "Have you got any epistolary, I've never known how to say that. Is it epistolary or epistolary?"
I'd say epistolary, but who knows?
Epistolary, I'll go with that. Have you got any ideas that have got a sort of epistolary theme to them? Because they just finished Ladies of Letters and they wanted something similar. So I had the two single parents in an online forum meeting, and they both lived in different ends of the country. So that was broadcast on Radio 4 over 5 series. Then it got parked again. Then it got picked up as a TV idea, and was developed by quite a high profile producer, but then it stumbled again, by which time I had decided I wanted to write it as a novel. So in all that time, I had got to know Ned and Gemma so well that, you know, if you'd said to me, "Do you want to do it as a specialist subject on Mastermind?" I could, because I know absolutely everything about them, how they would react to things, how they behave, how they dress, what their sense of humour is like. It's been with me for so long that I just know Ned and Gemma better than I've known any other characters I've ever created.
And do you feel very protective of them? Is it sometimes quite hard to talk about them in case people criticise them?
I do, and I can give you a really good example of it, because when we made the first radio series, we had a fantastic cast. We had Maxine Peake and Chris Marshall, as they were called Tom and Rosie back then, but the same characters. And Chris Marshall, who I think he's married and got kids now, but he was a bit of a man about town back then. And he couldn't understand why Tom, aka Ned, was such a dweeb. And I thought, leave him alone. You know, he's bruised and he's damaged, and he isn't very observant, that if someone fancies him, he doesn't get it. You know, stop being rude to him. And I did feel very protective. I kept it to myself because I didn't want to upset the talent, but I was quite hurt by that.
Yes, absolutely. When these characters, you know, your creation, your babies, essentially, you're sending them out into the world, it is a really tough one.
Mm.
So when you were writing Pre-Loved Club, the location is obviously really important to you. Tell us about that and what it means to you to set it in a location like that.
Well, when I'd written it as a radio series, they lived in at different ends of the country. But when I started writing it as a novel, it made sense for them to be two sides of a city. Now, I moved to Hove in 2013. And the thing about Brighton and Hove is people think they know Brighton because they know the pier, they know the big wheel, maybe. No, the big wheel's gone, the I-36. They know a certain kind of Brighton, but there's a lot more to Brighton and Hove than that. So if you've got Ned living in Poets Corner, Hove, which is where I am now, and Gemma living in Bevendine, which is a very different part of Brighton, right across the city, I just thought it actually tells you a lot about them and their lives. He lives a very rarefied world in a nice, cozy, middle-class neighbourhood. And she lives in a much more, you know, they're the council houses that have been bought, and there's quite a high student population. So they live very different lives, and it felt really helpful to know the city so well and to use the city as a sort of metaphor for their two different lives. And actually, when I've got a piece that we thought I might read out. When Gemma meets her ex-partner Joe's new partner, they have moved into a neighbourhood she always thought that she and Joe would move into, because it was slightly upmarket from where they had been. And now she's quite envious of the fact that Joe has this life with his new partner Vicky, but she's excluded from it. So whether you know the city or not, you can probably find your own versions of those neighbourhoods in your own city and find the equivalent, and
Absolutely,
the equivalent bars,
yeah.
and the equivalent walks, and the equivalent distractions, you know, pubs and restaurants. There's a lot of, I was writing this during the lockdown, so it felt very weird. I'm sure a lot of writers you've spoken to have had this, where this was right at the beginning of the lockdown, where you're not going anywhere or seeing anyone, and you've almost forgotten what a pub feels like. And to suddenly send your characters off carousing without masks, without washing their hands, it all felt very, very weird, but hopefully.
I remember being in lockdown and watching something on TV, and the characters were in a bar and they were hugging each other. And I actually felt slightly panicked. So, this is ridiculous how quickly we've got into this new form of life where we're all terrified of everything. But it really struck me just how shocking it was to see that on TV, something that was obviously filmed long before anyone had even heard of COVID. But it was really fascinating. So I can get how interesting that is when you're writing about something so different from the situation that you're in.
I just saw that comment flash by about the character being the city being a character, and that's absolutely right. Because I'm hoping, and I mean, you don't know Brighton and Hove as well as I do. I'm hoping that the neighbourhoods I describe translate, and it's not too exclusively Brighton and Hovian, and it's not like an in-joke for people who live here, because that would be awful.
No, I mean, I've never lived in Brighton and Hove, although I know Brighton fairly well, but it is somewhere that I can equate it to different parts of London. And I found the passage, which I hope you're going to read in a minute. I found the bit about her thinking, it felt like a betrayal when you were reading it, thinking, oh, poor Gemma, she wanted to live here and her husband always said it's not for us. And there he is living there with his new partner. So I think everybody could understand that kind of atmosphere. So do you want to do a reading for us?
Yes.
I put a link in the chat to the Pre-Loved Club.
Okay, I will clear my throat and you'll have me looking down, so I'm sorry about that, no, that's about right, isn't it? Okay, so Gemma has gone for a walk with her best friend Roz, and she gets a message. This is on a Sunday afternoon. She gets a message that can she come and collect their son Kelvin from his ex's house, because they've been held up. So I think that's all you need to know. And his Joe's new partner is called Vicky. Vicky texts me detailed directions for how to get to their place. She even includes a Google Map link. I can hardly tell her I've stared into her bedroom door from the top deck of the number 2 bus more times than I care to admit. I must stop doing that. Maybe this visit will get it out of my system. Seeing her sofas, sniffing her soap. Joe's car is not parked in the driveway. Still running late then? Typical. Back in the day, you were just late. Mobile phones have given people permission to add running to make it sound like they're in demand rather than inconsiderate. I ring the doorbell and wait. I know what Vicky looks like. God knows I check out her Facebook page most days to see where she's been, whether she's tried out that new hairdresser a pal recommended or reactivated her gym membership. But ever since Joe dumped me, I've managed to avoid meeting her in the actual flesh. My walk with Roz has empowered me, and today I reckon I can do it. If I meet her, maybe I can finally stop hating her. Then again, why should I? She ruined my life. She stole my husband. She stole my life. Of course I hate her. She's shorter than I expected, and yes, it's a good haircut, but I won't tell her that. Chopped into the neck, subtle highlights, one of those feathery fringes that on me would highlight my flat screen forehead. She's dressed nicely too, tight fit jeans, silk blouse with ruffles around the shoulders, fluffy polka dot slippers. I sense her giving me the once over too, and wish I wasn't wearing Joe's old t-shirt, not that she knows it was his. It makes me feel vulnerable, unprepared, weak. Thanks ever so much, Gemma. I really appreciate this. She ushers me into her kitchen, which is bigger than I expected. I'll put the kettle on, or can I do an espresso? Then I notice the blood on the worktop, on a big wad of kitchen paper and a tea towel, on the cuff of her blouse. She sees that I've seen and goes pale. She reveals a badly cut finger gushing blood. She sits with a lucky thump on a bar stool and gives an embarrassed little laugh. I shouldn't be allowed near tin cans. Honestly, look at the mess I've made. She wobbles a bit like she's going to faint. I just did it 2 minutes before you rang the doorbell on a tin of tuna for Loopy, our cat. Sunday treat, I'm not very good with blood. And suddenly now she faints, or at least swoons, and I have to catch her. Towel, I ask, when 2 seconds later her eyelids flutter open. Plasters? She waves at a cupboard above the sink, and there's a very snazzy first aid kit. Mine's an old biscuit tin with some perished band-aids. I must restock my biscuit tin. What if Kelvin cut himself badly? What kind of mother am I? She doesn't direct me to any towel, so I make do with the one hanging from a row of hooks by the sink, which spells out LOVE. I hate cutesy stuff like that. I stem the blood with the towel and give her a glass of water. She apologizes again. I'm fine with Amelie if she graces her knee, or once she fell off a swing and bit her lip. She's napping now, thank God. So much blood when she did that, fell off the swing. Well, you have to, don't you? Be the grown-up. They rely on you. It's because I was by myself when I did it that went a bit woozy. Thank you, Gemma. I really appreciate it. Let me make you a cup of tea. I have to push her forcibly back down onto the bar stool. I'll do the tea, hot and sweet, whether you take sugar or not. You just sit there and keep that towel pressed down. I'm still not comfortable taking care of Vicky, but I remind myself that it's my job, so it's instinctive. Plus, searching for mugs, I get to look inside her kitchen cupboards. It's actually quite satisfying to see that mine are way more spotless than hers. I know for a fact that she's got a new cleaner. She was asking for recommendations on Facebook a few months back, but she's being robbed by whoever she hired, if you ask me. Shall I stop there?
I think you should carry on.
Oh, okay. There's a bit more. We sip our tea from flowery mugs, forced to make conversation because Joe and Kelvin are still not back. We struggle to find stuff to talk about. We cover the weather in under 4 minutes. Then I ask a few stilted questions about Amelie. Then we pretty much dribble to a halt. When at long last Joe texts Vicky with his ETA, 15 minutes, she texts back that I'm here, but doesn't mention that she cut her finger. I don't want him to worry. He's always telling me what a klutz I am, stubbing my toe on the bed, treading mud into the den, an accident waiting to happen, according to him. She does her little laugh as if he's paid her a huge compliment. That sounds like Joe. He was always telling me how forgetful I was, or that I could never leave a slab of dairy milk unfinished. And so it became a self-fulfilling prophecy until I realised what he was doing. It's how he is. I see that now. Vicky peeks below the bloody towel. It stopped gushing. There we go. Just a scratch. Oh, I've done a bit of fiddling here. Oh, I know. Would you like to see Kelvin's room? Then you can be sure he's got everything he needs while he's here. His room is big, bright and modern. View across the back gardens to the downs. One of those beds with a pull-out mattress underneath if he has mow-it over. It's IKEA's greatest hits, from the bookshelves to the beanbag to the blinds. But it doesn't have anything of Kelvin himself. The Albion posters above his bed, the angle poised lamp that's lost its spring and keeps drooping down, the scuffed skirting board that I plan to sand and paint next week, the blue and white junk shop chair I lovingly restored. I smile to myself. I win. This may be where Kelvin sleeps 2 nights a week, but it's so obviously not his home. I bloody win.
Good. Excellent. Thank you so much, Sue.
I hate reading. I'm sorry. I'm such a stumbly reader.
It was lovely. And I really wanted you to get to the bit that because I particularly love that bit that you said about Vicky, when she talks about, oh, Joe always tells me this. And she says, oh, he used to do that to me. And then you start to realize there's this real shift, because before then, as a reader, I was, thinking Vicky was this kind of awful woman. And then I love the way you did that with her character, that you make us start empathizing with both women, not just Gemma, who's the main one in our eyes. And I think it was really good. We've got a comment here. Brilliant reading, Sue. You really bring the characters to life. Someone else has said, loved that. And we have a long comment here. It's lovely to have you back, Sue. The story sounds real and relates to many people who've experienced breakdowns of relationships. I am going to purchase this book. So
excellent. My job is done.
Exactly. So yeah, tell us a little bit about Gemma and Vicky. Did you always want to make Vicky the character that she was, or did she change in the writing?
I think I didn't. I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers away from either book, but when there are secondary romantic interests in the book, you want to make sure they're sympathetic. You don't want to make them into sort of caricatures. So with Gemma meets a guy called Dan, and Ned meets a woman called, I think she was Nancy. Yes, she was Nancy. I had this terrible habit of changing the names of the characters until I can't remember what they are anymore. You wanted to make sure that they're nice people, that you don't create caricatures, that Ned suddenly has a relationship with a horrible woman, or that Joe's chosen a sort of a marriage wrecker. I think Vicky is someone, and I think I say later that Vicky didn't know that Joe was married until it was too late, and she was sucked in. And Joe, I don't think this is a spoiler to say that Joe is a charmer, but he's not the nicest person. So you know, in a way, you can have a bit of sympathy for Vicky, because you know that you know stuff that she doesn't know about why Joe is not a nice person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really good. And I do love your characters. You've got a comment here saying, I love the characters. They're so real. And I think that's really true. And reading it, we can really feel them, and I get a kind of an image of them. In fact, it's one of those things where I think if I saw somebody play them on film or TV, which I'm sure you would love to happen, but I think, oh, would they look like I'm imagining them? Because I have a very, particularly Ned, I have a really kind of strong image of him in my head. And, you know, would it be right if I saw an actor playing him? So when you can get into a book like that and really get to know those characters, I love that. Now, one character I really found interesting is Roz. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Yeah, well, because Gemma goes to this single parents support group where she meets Ned. She goes there every week, and it's almost her social life because she doesn't have a social life. So she has a friend there called Roz who's widowed. So where everyone else is talking about their ex and, you know, how poorly treated they were and or whatever, Roz is slightly different because she is widowed and she didn't choose to be a single parent. She's slightly more upmarket than Gemma. Gemma works in a care home and is very good at her job, but she can sometimes, you know, be a bit too mouthy with her boss. Roz has set up a cake business making cakes, and Roz just lives in a different part of town. If you knew Brighton and Hove, she lives in the Caroline Lucas bit of Brighton. And a lot of people call it Moosley Mountain. There's certain streets around there that, you know, it's sort of cliched as a sort of slightly more upmarket neighborhood. So Gemma's very much in awe of Roz because she just seems to be so much more stylish and so much more classy, whereas Gemma is someone who gets their jeans from Tesco's and wishes she looked a bit smarter than she does. So I think there's a slight she slightly idealizes her, that's it. But as the friendship progresses, they become much more equals. And Gemma realizes that she can do all this stuff, and she's not, you know, for someone who's so mouthy and sparky, she's actually incredibly insecure. Whereas Ned's insecurities are there for all to see. Gemma keeps hers a lot more hidden. There's something else I'd really like to point out. I don't know whether anyone's noticed it, but it's something I think is important about both books, and it's something I didn't do on purpose, is that both books are written in the first person present tense. And I didn't know how helpful this would be, but because we're hearing everything from their point of view, it means that the reader picks up things that Gemma doesn't pick up or that Annie doesn't pick up. So when we read Annie Stanley, when Annie Stanley is saying she's fine and absolutely everything's fine, and, you know, she's got her life's fine, the reader can tell that it isn't. And the same with Ned and Gemma, and I found that a really useful device. I've changed it in book 3, which we'll talk about later, but I think that makes the characters more immediate. Sometimes it's harder to write, but I think it makes them more immediate because we are with them as they are doing things in the now, as they happen.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really good way of bringing you right into the story. And going back to Roz briefly, I thought it was really good having her as a widow because, as you say, it's a totally different perspective. Everybody else is complaining about their exes, and she just misses her ex. And there's this lovely idea of, you know, well, you know, that being a single parent isn't all about, you know, the strife and the anger and the misery of divorce. And it was very good to have that other perspective in there. I really appreciate it. I wondered, and this may have been pure coincidence, you talked about writing it in lockdown. Was it lockdown was that a factor in making Gemma work in a care home, or was she always going?
She'd always worked in a care home. I just had this idea that she was someone who was at school. When she was at school, she was very bright, but because she was often answering back to the teacher, she got excluded, or she sabotaged her education by just being mouthy.
Yeah.
And so she's very bright and could have gone to university, but it was just never something that would have occurred to her. So I think she's someone who has never realized her skills, and a care home job strikes me. There are a lot of people who go into care home work who are very talented and have got people skills. Did you see that play a few years ago that was on TV written by Jack Thorne about lockdown, which had Jodie Comer in it, about a care home nurse having to hold the whole thing together? It was called Care, I think. Anyway, Jodie Comer would make a great Gemma, but it was someone who was just very, very skilled with people, but didn't have the educational qualifications to back it up. And that's why I always thought that would be the right job for her.
And I really like her relationship with Felipe, who's one of her fellow workers, and his relationship with the residents. It's wonderful the way that they get on. And he's, has his drag act, and he's always borrowing the residents' jewelry, and they love, I mean, it's just such a lovely idea. And the boss is always trying to make them be clinical and professional. And the things she tells them off about, you think, but these are the things that are making the residents' life joyful. And I love the way that you kind of empathizing with them. Was the boss based on anyone that anyone you've worked with?
No, but when my husband and I were looking for a care home for his mother, shortly before she died, actually, we visited one care home, and there was a manager just like, is she called Lorraine? She's another one I changed the name of. Gosh, I can't remember. Let's say her name.
Well, I'm sure it's Janine.
Janine, she had been Lorraine. I must stop doing this. And I just remember this woman who was quite a large woman on very high stilettos, sort of teetering around the corridor saying, and this is the common room, and this is this room. And I just had a visual image of her, and that was Janine for me. I don't think I said anything about her size because I didn't want to be sizes, but I just remember her being rather full of herself, like she was the queen of all she surveys. And actually, I just had the idea that nobody really liked her.
Yeah. Well, it was brilliant, because I just kept thinking I was kind of really on the side of the residents where they don't like her, but they love the carers. And that just gave you a really nice glimpse into both Gemma and Felipe's character as well, seeing them through the eyes of the residents that they care for. So before we get on to the novel that you're working on now, I know you wrote another book earlier, because you've written a lot for TV and radio. And I'm going to put this link into the chat. So it's called Writing for TV and Radio, a Writer's and Artist's Companion. And I know that you are, with a lot of people here, so I know a lot of people at Goldster are, looking into different forms of writing. So could you tell us a little bit about this?
It's part of a series that was published by, it's not Faber, is it? It's quite a long time ago that I wrote it. I can't remember. Anyway, they did a series of books about how to write novels, how to write theatre plays, how to write crime, various different genres of novel writing. And I was commissioned with a fellow writer. All the books are written by two writers. And I was commissioned with another writer called Nick Warburton, because they were trying to find people who'd written for TV and for radio. He's a lovely, lovely man. We had a nice time writing. He's currently quite, he writes a lot of Archers episodes. You might have heard his name there. And so the format of the book is the same with every genre. So you have a sort of essays of introduction from us. Then you have a series of essays in the middle from established writers. And at the time we managed to get, I got someone from Borgen, got a friend of mine who now writes for Succession, that didn't exist then, various people to write a chapter about the process of writing. And then the third section of the book is really practical stuff about structure and about dialogue and about rewriting. So it's a very readable book, even if you start in the middle and then work your way out and read the essays from other writers first. And it's a book you can dip into. So I think it's probably quite a helpful book. And I think all the books in that series are very helpful.
So it's published by Bloomsbury, actually. And
Bloomsbury.
The link does say it's out of stock, but it says it's available in 2 weeks.
Good.
It's written that there. It does say out of stocks, but it says it's dispatches in a couple of weeks. So we're fine with that one. But yes, it's published by Bloomsbury, not Faber.
And I knew it was one of the prestigious ones. I couldn't remember which one it was. I've got a terrible memory.
So tell us about some of you've talked about the radio series that Pre-Loved Club grew out of. What about your other ones? Thinking of your most famous one, really.
Well, the last one I did was inspired by Cooking and a Bedsitter, the Catherine Whitehorn recipe book. And but it's more than, if anyone who knows it, it's much more than a recipe book. It's a sort of snapshot of a girl about town in the early 60s, moving into her bedsitter and having to learn how to cook on 2 rings. And it's so beautifully written. And I picked it up in a junk shop a few years ago and just instantly thought this would make a great radio series if I create a character who does exactly that. She moves out of her parents' home, moves into a bedsitter in West Hampstead and doesn't know how to cook. And so each episode was based on one of the recipes. I can't remember some of the recipes now. Some of them really are quite disgusting when you go back and look at them, you know, spam related stuff. Although there's nothing wrong with spam, but
I'm sure many
well,
people here
there
have
is.
They can probably.
But that was I wrote 2 series of that, so it was 8 episodes altogether, and that was the last thing I've done for radio, because then I moved into books. But it was a really joyful experience. The cast were fantastic. It was just lovely, and I loved writing something set in the early 60s. I used a lot of music and a lot of references. I'm old enough that a lot of the references I didn't have to do much Googling on because I remembered them. Yeah, it was as my last broadcast scripted radio thing, it was a lovely thing to do.
It was great fun. I remember listening to it and I absolutely loved it. I'm sure many other people heard it as well. Cooking in a Bedsitter on Radio 4. It's the person who's
it's repeated every so often. I think you might even find it on 4 Extra now. Someone contacted me recently to say, I found the last 4 episodes, but the previous 4 aren't available, but it pops up every so often.
It'll be on BBC Sounds at some point. Yes, it's called Cooking in a Bedsitter. That's right, isn't it? That's the title of it.
Yeah.
So you've told us that you're writing a new book. Are you willing to share a little bit about it?
Yeah. Another thing that I don't want you to tell anyone is I've realised that having based Free Love Club on a radio series that at the time I felt there was so much more to tell, that I have a lot of other ideas of things that I've thought of over the years that have never got anywhere or have fallen at the first hurdle, but I've always loved as an idea. So for a long time I was thinking my 3rd novel had to be something set in the early 60s because of Bedsitter, about a character who was now older, because in both books, Pre-Love Club and Annie Stanley, I wrote 2 older women who were quite eccentric and quite untypical of an older woman. Hilary in Annie Stanley and Judy in the Pre-Love Club. And I thought I wanted to write something about someone from the 60s who was older now and what was her story. And it took me about 2 years to realise I didn't know what I was doing, and I just had to park that. I might come back to it. And then I remembered something I'd written for TV about 20 years ago that never got anywhere. And it's called My New Best Friends, and it's about 4 women who meet on a train that breaks down. They're all going back to Eastbourne. It's Eastbourne now. It wasn't Eastbourne before. It may not stay Eastbourne, but at the moment it's Eastbourne. And they've all got very different lives, very different issues that they're sort of carrying around with them. And they all become friends while they're waiting for this train to start up again. And it's called My New Best Friends because they are their new best friends and they help each other through the problems in their lives. And they're all very different. But in this one, I've gone for 3rd person past tense. And that's been quite a challenge because each chapter is written from a point of view of one of them. But I have to keep remembering how much they each know about each other at each stage. So that's a bit of a mind test. There's another word I was going to use, but I didn't. Mind challenge.
I find that really fascinating because I always remember a few years ago being on a train for a long journey, and there were these 2 women. I was a kind of 4 seat, I was sitting there and these 2 other women came and sat. It was a very busy train. They'd never met before, but they got chatting. They were elderly women, and it turned out they had loads of friends in common. One of them, she'd gone to the same Jewish Saturday club as this other woman's brother, and they knew people in common, and they started talking about London when they were little. And these women were probably in their 80s, and they were laughing about how trendy Islington in North London is today. And they were saying, oh, do you remember when the bus would go through Islington and you'd just cower until you got through to the other side and no one would ever get it. And for me, it was absolutely fascinating. And I wish I'd written it all down. So just when you said that, I had a flashback to listening to these 2 wonderful women who I think by the end of this train journey were probably going to be friends for life because we discovered so many friends in common. But it was fascinating. And yes, I should have taken copious notes, but I actually wanted to, but I thought they're going to know I'm taking notes.
They wouldn't have known. They could have been doing anything, couldn't you?
Yes,
unless you said, could you just say that again? I missed
so how
it.
do you spell that word? Yeah.
So well, the thing about these 4 is that the thing that I've learned from the novel writing and from script writing is that there are lots of moments where you think people are going to get together and they don't. So it's all accidental the way they all end up. I've only written 10,000 words, but they all end up going to a pub together, having got off the train at Eastbourne, and ways in which you think they're not going to continue to be friends, but life and circumstances gel them together. So it's really early days. My agent likes it, but it's not gone any further than that.
So you say only 10,000 words, and I can imagine that a lot of people on Goldster who've recently done the Goldster creative writing competition and things, that they're probably thinking, how do you get to 10,000 words? Are you planning for it to be about 90,000? Is that?
Yeah.
Is that what your other two have been?
Yes, the second one was slightly longer, I think. But I think it was 90,000 at the first draft, and then in changing things. And actually, the thing that is really, I can't stress highly enough, the first book, this didn't seem to be an issue, but with the second book, I started to, all my dialogue was absolutely fine, but my editor said to me, you're missing a lot of the thoughtful moments and the sort of the moments where the characters think about their situation, articulate their situation. And you need to put more of that in, because I was just moving the story along really quickly, because that's what you do with the script. Mm-hmm. So I think it got longer in the second draft because I added a lot more moments of contemplation about them thinking about their lives and them thinking about their, you know, what Gemma thought of Ned and what Ned thought of Gemma, because that's really important. And I missed all that in the first draft. So that's where a great editor comes in and shows you the things you hadn't even noticed that you hadn't done.
Oh, absolutely. The role of an editor is so crucial. I know we've talked about this quite a few times on Goldster. I don't think we can ever talk about it too much. The importance for writers of having a really, really good editor. When you're plotting, it was quite interesting. You just talked then about you've changed the tense and you're going back in time and you're having to remember, oh, hang on a minute, they wouldn't know that about each other. Do you find that do you plot very meticulously? Are you writing this one very differently from the first two because it's set in the past as opposed to in the present? Is it a different process entirely?
To be perfectly honest, I've written the 10,000 words as they call them partials, as a taster to be sent out to see if people, to send to publishers. So I've not gone beyond setting it all up and having a really good cliffhanger, which is I can't even it's just they've all got together and gone to the pub. I haven't plotted out the rest of it, but I've done a document for my own benefit as a sort of, and it's also a sales document, giving an idea of what the rest of the story will be. I think I'm coming to the point where I know I have to carry on writing it, or I will carry on writing it, or I hope someone says to me, we love this, carry on writing it. But there's also a little bit of me that's fearful, because having done two of these now, and talking about words earlier, if you write a radio play, that's about 8,000 words, I think. I can't quite remember, something like that. 90,000 words is a lot of words. So having done it twice, I know I can do it. But and
we know you can do it too.
But also I'm of an age now where I want to do things that I can't do things speculatively anymore. I want to know that someone wants it, because I haven't got the time. This makes me sound like I'm going to, get run over by a bus tomorrow, but I haven't got the time to waste my time on things that are speculative. I want to write something that has a market and an audience. Otherwise, I can't get involved with these women in case, if I love them too much and then nobody wants them, then I'm going to be heartbroken.
Yeah. And do you set yourself a certain number of words per day or hours per day? How do you organize your writing time?
I try and go for 1,000 words a day, which some people think is nothing, and other people think, oh, aren't you great? I only do 400 words a day. But I've got a pretty good system of writing, which is that I'll write my 1,000 words, and then the first 1,000 words, and then the next morning I will edit that and then write the next 1,000 words. So in the morning I'm editing, and in the afternoon I'm writing the new 1,000 words. It works out pretty much like that. Mm-hmm. And it does mean that my first draft is in quite good shape. Structurally, I think it's in quite good shape. With Annie Stanley, there are things that I had to move, and I had to change one of the chapters, but it seems to work for me. I know other people who just write everything that's in their head and then do a massive, massive edit. But I can't see the point in that. I just think I don't want any wasted words. So I know if I've edited yesterday's words before starting the new one, A, it gets me back into this my headspace of where they are, where we are in the story. But B, I know that things are in reasonably good nick. I'm not saying that's how people should do it. It's just how I do it.
Yeah, and that's the thing I think we've realized so much on Goldster, how every writer has a different technique. And I actually love that. And some people say this is the only way to do it, but actually no, it's the way that works for them. And we've got a question here. How long does it take you to write the 1,000 words roughly?
I can sometimes do it really. I mean, the other thing to say is that I roughly know the story, but I usually plot out the next 1,000 words or the next chapter in bullet points before I start writing, because there's nothing worse than thinking, oh, I know where I'm going. Some people are very good at that. I'm not. But the days I really struggle are the days where I haven't thought it all through. And every so often I forget that and write without planning, the next 1,000 words, and I really struggle. So
that's such a good tip to know, to get to know your own writing style and know, well, actually, I have to plot, even if I think I've got a great idea, I actually have to plot it so that I know where it's going.
Yeah, because there may be things that if you just, and it's just bullet points, it's a document that if I showed it to anyone else, they wouldn't really understand what I meant. But I know what's in my head and I've just put the main points down on paper. I suppose if I'm in a good place with the story, I can write 1,000 words in, I don't know, a few hours. I'm not sure. I don't know, because there's a lot of stopping and starting. There's a lot of going to make cups of coffee. There's a lot of Googling of things that really aren't important. I mean, I did a lot of Googling and research for Annie Stanley, obviously. This one was a lot easier because I didn't have that excuse of thinking, I wonder what Brighton and Hove is like, because I know. But sometimes those moments where you go and make a cup of coffee or go and hang up the washing, or I make a lot of soup, those are those thinking times. I mean, or going for a walk or whatever, that's also writing. It just without the words.
That thinking time is so crucial. And if you don't give yourself that, I've got a direct message that's come through about agents. How did you get your agent interested? Did you have to send the whole manuscript?
Well, it's more complicated than that, because I had an agent when I was a scriptwriter, and the agency I'm with has got script writing clients and novel writing clients. And I'd said long ago to the novel writing agent who I'd met socially, I'd love to write a novel sometime. And she was always very encouraging. So when the time came for me to move genres, she was there. And she was wanting to see the first 20,000 words, or the first couple of chapters. I didn't even give her 20,000 words. But she knew me well enough from my work within the agency to know that I was someone she could trust to get it done and not miss deadlines and know all the stuff that once you're a professional writer. So she kind of it was a relationship that was already there. So I don't know that helps anyone who's looking to find an agent. But I think if you're a completely new writer, you may well have to write the whole thing speculatively.
And I would suggest look at the Writers and Artists Handbook and see what individual agents say. It's a direct.
Do we still have this? Are we still with the same agent?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
But I would say to any of you who do get the Writers and Artists Yearbook or All Writers and Artists Handbook, I can never remember which one round it is. Two different ones. One's yellow, one's red. It's basically a directory of all the agents, publishers, etc., and they do put their submission guidelines in there. So it's a really important thing, and they should have it at your local library. Please do ask them if they don't. Do remember the importance of using libraries. I'm going to tell everybody what is coming up. Just quickly, what's coming up on Goldster. So tomorrow we have Book of the Month. This is the one that we've been reading, Murder Before Evensong by the Reverend Richard Coles. We're going to be continuing our cozy crime before we go next Book of the Month. We're well and truly back into the classics again. Next Book of the Month, you've got Humphrey, who is going to be talking to you about Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote. And then from next week afterwards, you're back with Humphrey for a couple of days. And on the Thursday, the 1st of December, can you believe we're in December next week? It seems absolutely extraordinary. He is talking to Ethan Corin Benghazi, who's had an extraordinary view of development in the Middle East and Africa over the last 3 decades. Much of his focus is on Libya, whose collapse into anarchy 10 years ago has impacted all our lives. And they're going to have a talk about his new books, Exit the Colonel. And sorry, his name is Ethan Corin, and the second book is called Benghazi. I'm sorry, I completely messed that up. And then he's talking to Gillian Carrick on the Friday, an animal lover and author of Health Guides for Pets. Her books include My Dog Has Arthritis But Lives Life to the Full. I think I definitely need to get a hold of that. And then I'll be back on the 8th of December, and I will tell you, I will be back with total jet lag because I'm heading off to Texas to a Dickens festival. Can you believe that? And I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to Catherine May, the New York Times best-selling author of Wintering, which is just an amazing book about how we deal with times of trauma and kind of hunkering down. It's a really important book, I think, actually. And then, of course, we're starting to get into the Christmas season, but I will be talking to you about that next time I see you. I just want to give a real big shout out for this book, The Pre-Loved Club. It's absolutely wonderful. I loved Annie Stanley All at Sea. Really loved this one as well. And I'm actually about 2 chapters before the end because I couldn't quite finish it. So
you don't know how it finishes.
No, and I was just, that's why I said no spoilers. And I can't tell you, I was so cross that I had to stop reading to start doing this and interview Sue. I just should have got up at 5 o'clock instead of 6 o'clock this morning. It's been a bit of a mad morning today. But
it's out in paperback in February, by the way.
Oh, good tip.
And the other thing, I'm sure other writers say this, because otherwise, well, anyway, if you enjoy it, an Amazon review is always really, really helpful because it just shows publishers and reviewers that your book has hit the spot. So if you like it, please pop a review on Amazon. It would be really appreciated.
And I've put the link in the chat. I put the links to Sue's books from bookshop.org, which is an online place. But obviously, please do go to your local bookshops and or your libraries and ask to either buy or borrow Sue's books from them, because it is really important. And I know that libraries are important to you as well, aren't they, Sue? I think we really make sure the community, Goldster community, uses libraries, because they're in such danger of being closed down. So please do try and pop into your library, every couple of weeks or whatever, and just, borrow things. The more you use them, the more we might get to keep them. So it's been an absolute joy having you back again. Good luck with book number 3. I can't wait to read it. And any publishers out there, you should be snapping this up because it's going to be as much fun as the other 2. And I do hope, because it sounds like the perfect Goldster book, I do hope you will come back and talk to us when it's come out.
Okay, it might be a little while yet, but that's a date.
And everybody here, don't forget to tell your friends about Sue's books. I shall see you all tomorrow, as I said, with this book, Reverend Richard Coles. It's not him himself, it's just me talking about it. Come along and chat. And remember that our book of the month is not recorded. It's basically an open mic session. Come and chat to me, otherwise I'll look very silly just talking to myself.
Do tell him he gets referenced in the Pre-Love Club.
He does. It made me laugh when I was reading the Pre-Loved Club and I came across his name and I thought, how funny that I'm talking to Sue the day before we're talking about his book. There's some lovely comments coming in, very interesting. Thanks very much. A brilliant interview. You're very kind, everybody. It's great to see you. I will see you tomorrow, and Sue will see you when she finishes writing this next book.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye. Sue and I'll
Bye-bye.
turn now.
Bye.